Hello. Wow, it's been a while since it has been a while since I've done one of these. It's good to be back. It's good to chat with you all. And let's here's Professor Stein. So just a little background while we wait for Professor Stein to join. So today, oh, there he is. Coming guns a blazing. Okay, well, I was just giving everyone a little introduction that you then interrupted. No, I'm kidding. So basically, the reason why we're chatting is obviously we love having Professor Stein, everyone's favorite history teacher, but also 75 years ago today, the United States dropped an atomic bomb, the world's first ever atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan. So we're going to talk about a little of this. We're going to get into it because the last time that we left off, Professor Stein, the U.S. was chilling, in their neutral isolationist vibes. We ended with we're talking about the lead up to World War II in our last video, and the U.S. so far hasn't played a role. So we're going to focus now on the U.S.'s role in World War II and how that started. So do you want to jump right into it? Do you have anything else you want to add?
Today we're going to discuss the Pacific Theater, I believe, and the beginning of why we decided to build a bomb with nuclear fission and how that led to us using it. And then I guess we're going to do another one on the European theater because it's so vast and it would take forever. And
Yeah.
I don't want to bore the crap out of everybody.
Yeah, we figured we would split the Pacific War and the European theater just because it's so much information. We want to really get into some cool things. And what I'm excited about talking about with you today is that a lot of us, we know kind of the general gist of World War II. So I really wanted to focus on lesser known facts, interesting things, and different perspectives. So I guess start us off with Pearl Harbor. What happened there?
Okay, so as everybody knows, December 7th, 1941, a date that will live in infamy according to former President FDR, was when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And basically, to make it quick, they bombed Pearl Harbor because they felt it was their main option. They had two options because we had frozen their assets and really cut off oil supply to them. And as a small island, Japan was looking for resources. And they had started expanding into other islands and looking for resources. And we were like, wait a minute, slow down. And one of the things they did is they went after France's colonies, like French Indochina, which my students should know is Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. But we got pissed off. And we're like, dude, don't mess with that. And we cut them off. And again, when you're a small island, a lot of these wars over the years, because the countries need resources. One thing, the United States going for it, we have tons of resources. Anyway, so they bombed Pearl Harbor thinking, you know what, we're going to wipe out their Pacific fleet and then they'll be done. They'll want to make a peace agreement. Of course, the big problem was our aircraft carriers were not in base. That killed them. And they really woke a sleeping giant. Now, one little fact before we move forward. Do you know they tried to bomb Pearl Harbor again?
What?
In 1942 March, about 3 months after Pearl Harbor, they sent two what they call flying boats or seaplanes with bombs to bomb Pearl Harbor and try and ruin and wreck the salvage and repair of that efforts. But
No
because
way.
of bad weather,
I never knew that.
so what happened was the weather was bad. The pilots couldn't see. One pilot they suspect dropped his bombs over the ocean. The other one dropped it somewhere inland near a high school, believe it or not. And there was a big 6-foot crater next to some high school. They didn't come close to Pearl Harbor, but they did try to bomb Pearl Harbor again.
Wow, they were the Japanese were definitely risk takers and lunatics. That army. Yeah.
I can't say what I want to say about them, but they were not big and
I know. I told Paul you have to be nice. And we're told when we're referring to wartime here, we're talking about the Japanese army, not the Japanese people. There's a big difference. One thing that I actually did find really interesting and kind of, like tragically funny or kind of a farce, I suppose, was it was just a stroke of luck in the first attack on Pearl Harbor that when they bombed Pearl Harbor, the ships, the main battleships, they were actually out in doing training exercises at the time, completely by chance. So even though Pearl Harbor did cause massive destruction, they didn't actually destroy the major battleships. And those were the battleships that would go 6 months later across the seas and give Japan a taste of their own medicine.
And to touch on that, the ships they did get were old World War I ships. They were outdated. And it's interesting because they specifically picked Sunday to attack. And normally the ships would be in port on Sunday, but they weren't. So, and it wasn't
it was just totally it was a fluke.
FDR suspected they were going to do something, but nobody knew, nobody knew for sure that was going to happen. But yeah, we got very lucky. And the biggest thing was the aircraft carriers, because what World War II showed us was the war was all about aerial support, dive bombers, planes. That was all about that. And we took advantage of that more than any other country. Plus, our production was incredible. We were, putting out, I don't know how many hundreds of planes every day, but we could outproduce all of Europe. So Japan had no. And can I say one thing that amazes me?
Sure. Hi, Joni.
Joni, everybody's saying hi. So
everyone say hi, Joni.
Oh, she didn't realize we were live. I forgot. I lost my train of thought there.
You said something that really interested you about the production and the air power.
No, I know we ramped up. Oh, I forget now. I couldn't.
Okay, well, I actually really do want to get into the air power and the aerial bombing. But first, I want you to give us an overview of what the situation was in the Pacific once the U.S. arrived in 1942, right after Pearl Harbor, because the war had actually been going on for quite some time over there before the U.S. arrived.
Okay, so yeah, let's start there real quick. So a lot of people believe that the beginning of the Second Sino-Japanese War, which means the war between Japan and China, which technically began in 1937, even though in 1931 Japan invaded Manchuria. Most people say the full-on invasion in 1937 is when that started. So a lot of people point to that as the actual start of World War II. Okay, so now they bombed Pearl Harbor in 1941, the end of 1941. So in 1942, we have to mobilize, and it doesn't happen overnight, as we know. So Japan is running roughshod all over the South. See, they're taking over all the French and British colonies, Burma, Malaysia. They're going Hong Kong, Singapore. They're going at everybody. So we're not mobilized enough to combat it yet, but it's going to start, and it starts. I would say the biggest, one of the main beginnings of that was when we went to Coral Sea. But before we get to Coral Sea, I just want to mention one other thing. I'm sorry, I love mentioning these tidbits. You know that they actually invaded. The first time that American land was invaded, contiguous United States, well, not contiguous, American land, were the Aleutians. They were basically islands off Alaska, and Japan invaded them. And that had never happened before, just so you know.
Wow.
So Alaska, between Alaska and Russia, there are these islands. So that's one thing. One other thing that was really cool, not cool, but they tried to start forest fires in Oregon. And they sent bombers to drop incendiary bombs in Oregon. And it didn't work. I mean, they dropped some bombs. It didn't cause what they wanted. Yeah, they had plans to bomb California and Texas.
They actually did bomb California, I learned also recently. It wasn't huge, but they did bomb. I mean, they were really ballsy, that's for sure.
Well, I say why, but you'll get mad at me if I say why.
Yeah, I know. I will. But no, they were completely going crazy, taking over Southeast Asia. They were, doing like the same way Germany was trying to take over Europe. The Japanese had been doing that for quite some time in Southeast Asia. And what I find interesting here is the role that colonialism played, because these Southeast Asian countries, Vietnam is one that I'm particularly familiar with, and we'll do a video on that one day too. But Vietnam had been, colonized by the French for 100 years at that point. Most of the Southeast Asian countries had European colonizers. So at the beginning, when the Japanese arrived, they kind of sold the locals on this idea of Asia for Asians. And like, we're coming here to liberate you from the white man or the Europeans. And it turned out that the Japanese were in many ways a lot worse than life under colonialism.
That's an understatement. The Japanese might have been the worst. They're worse than the Germans, the Russians. They were brutal. And, you know, the rape of Nanking, we've talked about that. I mean, they literally raped and killed 300,000 civilians. They were ruthless. Yeah, they were awful. And there were other, throughout the war, whether it was the Bataan Death March or the British
That was
soldiers.
in the Philippines, everyone, the Bataan Death March.
And then we had the bridge over the River Kwai, that famous movie that most of you kids don't know about, but your parents do. They were trying to build a railroad from Thailand to Burma to get to India for resources. And they basically had British prisoners building it. Most of them died along the way. They were absolutely brutal, the Japs. They did not care about life. And remember, their motto was, not motto, but they had that Bushido code. You know what the Bushido code was? The warriors. They'd rather kill themselves than surrender or die, whatever it was. And what was interesting in this war, and you hear American soldiers when you watch old films about the war, they said that they couldn't believe that these people would just charge at us and we would just gun them down and they would keep coming. They were very fanatical.
Fanatical is definitely the right word. There's a lot of recommendations I have, especially for podcasts, if you guys are interested in hearing more about this, because that Japanese culture that was ingrained during the imperial era of Japan, that was ingrained into the soldiers, is devastating and fascinating at the same time. It goes all the way back to feudal Japan and the era of the samurais, when the samurais ruled Japan. And like Professor Stein was mentioning, they called it seppuku, which was an act where you commit suicide with a samurai sword, and that was an honorable death. So you would rather kill yourself. Kamikaze pilots, that was also a big thing. You know, the suicide pilots, they would rather do that than surrender, which made it really, really difficult to fight a war with them. And also, that's one of the reasons why it took them so long to surrender. They surrendered after Germany. They stayed in for a really long time, and they didn't surrender until we had literally destroyed their entire country, unlike humanity had ever seen before. But we're going to get to that.
Talk about the Southeast Pacific and just get
let's talk a little bit about the Pacific before we get on to that.
To add to what you said, you know, they view the emperor as a living god. I mean, they're that fanatical, and they really think he's a god. But so now we're mobilizing. We're trying to get out to help, you know, out there, and we know that there are enemies, and we got to get as close to Japan as we can. So first, one of the big battles early on in 1942 was called the Battle of the Coral Sea. The Coral Sea is way down south, right above Australia, your people, because what Japan was going to do is they were going to invade Papua New Guinea, which is right by Australia, and they were going to go into Australia. So it was an interesting battle because it was the first battle in the history where the ships did not actually see each other. It was fought with planes. And so the aircraft carriers never saw each other. And it was basically a standstill, but it ended up being a victory for the United States because the Japanese were unable to take Port Moresby, which is the capital of Papua New Guinea. And that would have been another staging area, and they would have been able to get into Australia. So that was one of the big starting battles. And then next, a couple months later, we have Midway. And I'm sure everybody knows about Midway, but if they don't.
The movie just came out, the Midway movie.
But it was the turning point for us to really say, you know what, we got you. And just to give everybody a quick thing on Midway is basically the protective island of Hawaii. Okay, so it's further north in the Pacific. And they had planned to invade Midway Island. Now, we, the Americans, with our code breakers, intercepted their transmissions and broke their code and figured out that they were going to attack Midway. It's really cool. And, you know, we faked them out. So we weren't sure we knew they were going to attack an island, but we weren't sure which one. So they send out all these different, like they were fishing. And one of it was, there's bad water in Midway. And I think it was AF or A1. I forgot the code word they used. And the Japs wrote back, Island A1 has water trouble. And I devised the plan to ambush them back. And at the time, they were the most, the best Navy in the world, supposedly. Well, we ended up sinking, I think, 4 of their aircraft carriers.
Wow.
And then from then on, there was a lot of battles, but we were like, you know what? We got you in the water. And then it became a land battle, a sea battle, an air battle. And we really began island hopping after that, which means going from island to island, trying to establish bases and airstrips to get close enough to invade mainland Japan. Because initially that's what we were thinking we had to do until we had the bomb.
Right. So that's also something interesting about this island hopping theory, because at the time there actually didn't exist an aircraft carrier that could travel round trip from from California to Japan and back, or Hawaii to Japan and back. Like it just didn't exist. There wasn't enough fuel, so they had to occupy these islands closer by so that they would be able to even reach Japan. Because can you imagine, you go and you bomb enemy territory and then you can't get back home?
Well, wait a minute. So there was a thing called the Dolittle Raid, which I think is pretty cool. Right after Pearl Harbor, before all these battles, we wanted to send the message to the Japanese and say, you know what, we can get to you. They thought we couldn't get to them. So this famous he was a trick pilot. He became an Air Force pilot. They did something that had never been done. They put 16 bombers, American bombers, on on a aircraft carrier, and they took off from an aircraft carrier, which had never happened before. And they literally bombed mainland Japan, but they didn't have enough fuel to come back. So what happened was there were 16. I think one landed in Russia, and they actually were held prisoner for a year, but they came back. Landed in China, because remember, China was our ally at the time because they weren't communist yet. And they were still, Chiang Kai-shek was still the ruler, and Mao Zedong was the communist ruler. But
they were during their civil war. That happened after.
Together for a brief period to fight against the Japanese because the Japanese had invaded. So the pilots that they caught, they actually captured one plane with, I think, 5 members that the Japanese brought back. They did execute 3 of them. But the rest of them made it back and were awarded medals and all that. But yeah, so before even those battles, we bombed mainland Tokyo. And
I want to talk about this aerial bombing, because this is also I've recently learned more of the details of this. We focus a lot on the atomic bomb, but these bombers, they were carrying this newly invented chemical called napalm. And napalm, it was designed in Harvard. It had never been used before, and it was automatically used as a weapon of war to drop bombs on mainland Japan. And something really interesting side fact that I learned recently, I don't know if you've heard of this, you probably have because you're a history teacher, but the American Army actually recruited like the top architects in the world to recreate Japanese and German cities, like every single detail, the buildings, the homes, and the materials, to see how they would blow up when they were bombed with napalm. And it was incredibly effective. And they basically, through this aerial bombing campaign, wiped out nearly every single city in Japan, except for 2.
Yeah, but Nagasaki. But remember, Japan especially is vulnerable because most of their houses are made of paper and wood. They didn't have a lot of concrete. And just so everybody knows, napalm is gasoline with a gel that literally sticks to you and just burns everything. It sticks and just burns everything. Vicious. But the bombing you're referring to happened later on in the war, and it still didn't make them surrender, which is why it's like, what are we going to do? We destroy everything, and they still want to fight. So
so that I want to get into the Manhattan Project now, but it's crazy to think that more people in total, more Japanese civilians died during these bombing attacks than the 2 atomic bombs combined. But that's just not talked about much. So I wanted to make sure that we mentioned that. So now we're kind of getting into the crux of the combo because of, the anniversary of Hiroshima today. So I want to get to the Manhattan Project, which is basically, tell us about that.
Someone just wrote something about VJ Day was September 2nd. I just want to let everybody know there's a difference. The Japanese surrendered on August 14th. Okay. August 15th is technically considered VJ Day, the victory in Japan. September 2nd is when we signed the armistice with them, MacArthur and their foreign minister on the ship. That's just so everybody knows. They actually surrendered in August. We just signed the papers in September. Just so, because someone just...
and I'm glad that you brought that up. I have a lot of questions here, guys, and I'm going to get to them. I just kind of wanted to do the high-level overview first, but I'm glad that you brought that up. If you see any others,
Yeah.
do that.
I'm waiting to make dumb comments so I can make fun of them.
I know. Where are your students?
Summertime, they're high school kids. They don't care, you know. They're
right. Yeah, you can't force them to watch this time.
playing video games and doing other things.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Well, we're doing this. So okay, so let's now tell us about the Manhattan Project. I want to know how many. I don't know how to do a poll, but just leave comments. I'm curious to know how. Hi, Rachel. There she is.
Oh, what about me? Hi, Rach. Love you.
Yeah, I've seen you. I've seen you. Oh, Rachel also wanted everybody to know that she was on the USS Missouri in San Diego.
Oh,
Or
nice.
no, the Midway. Sorry, the Midway, not the Missouri. The Missouri is where they signed the thing. She wanted to say that. So, okay. So, I want to know from you guys, leave some comments. How many of you had heard of the Manhattan Project before? And while you're writing that in, Professor Stein, go for it.
Okay, so the Manhattan Project. First of all, it just so you know how it was called the Manhattan Project, the original, the original idea started with Albert Einstein. Okay, you've all heard of Albert Einstein, I hope. He emigrated to the United States to get out of Germany because of what was going on to the Jews there. And he actually wrote a letter to President Roosevelt saying, look, the Germans are messing around with an idea for nuclear fission for a weapon. You better catch up, because if they get it, we're all in trouble, basically. He later regretted doing this because he was a pacifist and because of the destruction it ended up causing. So FDR gets together, you know, they got task force and they get together and they have this whole thing going on where they're going to look into it. Well, the headquarters of this originally was in Manhattan. And that's where all the stockpile of uranium was too. What had happened was over time, they realized that it was too crowded and too close to the coast. So they wanted to move to a remote location where that's where it ended up in New Mexico, because it ended up in New Mexico. And the whole idea was they wanted a weapon to end the war quickly, because we didn't want to lose tons of American lives. I mean, who wants that, right? So that's really how it all began. And, you know, we collaborated with the British initially and the Canadians too. And then we ended up running with it. And it's interesting. I read somewhere where it cost $2 billion for the project, which is about $28 billion as of 2018. It's a lot of money, but it ended the war. And you know, if you ask a lot of historians, you know, that are really into war, it probably saved 1 million lives. Because if we had invaded mainland Japan, it's not just the soldiers. Every person would have picked up a weapon. I mean, kids would, little kids, old ladies.
Yeah.
Anything for their country. Anyway,
yeah, and not just historians, actually. A lot of Southeast Asians say the same, and some Japanese too, unfortunately. It's just one of the real horrors of war. But, you know, there is a strong argument to be said that it saved a lot of lives. Lee Kuan Yew, side note, who's one of my favorite politicians, someone I admire the most in the 21st century. He was the leader of Singapore, and he said that he was always very vocal about the fact that the atomic bomb actually saved more lives. But that's a sick, you know, twisted way of thinking. But yeah, it's the horrors of war, right? So let's get into something that always blows my mind is, and also it's so sad, but President Roosevelt died just a few weeks before Germany surrendered. He was so close to seeing this happen. But anyway, he dies, and Vice President Truman takes over. Now, Truman had no idea about the Manhattan Project. Can you imagine?
Well, it's funny because when Truman finally realizes that he's at, I think, and I could be wrong in this, I might be incorrect on this, so someone correct me. I think it was at Potsdam. I mean, at Potsdam.
It was Potsdam.
So he didn't know till then. And of course, I think that changed his tune. They say, because remember, it was weird, and we'll talk about this in Europe, but FDR wanted the United States to actually be allies with the Russians. I don't think Truman did. FDR thought it in the big picture that it would be a good thing. And maybe the Cold War would have been a different story. I know that's not for this discussion, but, you know, I think that Truman had a task force too to discuss this. He had a whole committee. And again, what they concluded from what I've read and, you know, was that the problem is that if we don't use the bomb and we go in with troops, we're going to lose too many people. And I think everybody had that consensus. And they were like, we think the Japanese want to surrender, but they won't. Because, again, they were so fanatical. because they were destroyed, like you said, Natalia. Their cities were destroyed, yet they wouldn't surrender. And by the way, the firebombing, it did so much damage.
Yeah.
But no, which was amazing. So the discussions they had were, do we drop it on a major city with population, or do we drop it near a city so we could, as a deterrent, and so they can report back to the emperor? That's what they were talking about. And they finally decided, well, if we drop it outside of the population, how long is it going to take for that person to go back to the government? Are they going to believe them? You know, all these things. And what if it's a dud? It's a brand new weapon. What if it doesn't go off? So they said, you know what? No, we're going to use it on population and show them that we have this weapon. And if they don't stop, they're going to be wiped out. I mean, I think that's basically the thinking. Again, I'm not head, but
yeah. And Truman did warn them.
Well, he didn't say it. I don't think he used the word atomic bomb when
he said because obviously no one knew that it existed, but he said he gave a warning of calling at the Potsdam conference. He called for Japan's complete surrender under American terms, or they would face, quote, prompt and utter destruction. That was his warning.
No, it's a whole culture of fanaticism. So it's really the people that lead are the ones that make everybody else follow them, and they're half the time they're not the ones out there fighting. None of them are. I mean,
none of them are.
But Hitler was the same with Germany. You know, Hitler had two different armies, the SS and the Wehrmacht, and the soldiers after a while were like, "What are we doing?" You know, a lot of them, not all of them, but they're like, "It's crazy." And in Japan, I think the difference was their culture was everybody, whatever the emperor says, we do.
Yeah.
And the emperor, the prime minister, and boom. And you know, the fanaticism that they showed was just so devastating, and that's why we dropped the bomb. I mean, that really was it. And you know, it's interesting. And here in this country, I was reading stories about the Manhattan Project, and we had like 20 sites all over the United States. They were working on it all over, which, by the way, I think is why secrets got out. There were too many people involved. Got out, right? The Russians actually finally got the secrets, because if not, they might not have had a bomb as quickly, and we might have been able to shove one up Stalin's ass because he was nuts. But that's a whole different story.
Yeah. There's obviously so much to unpack here. And
get me off on the tangent.
The war. Look, the war was the way that the war ended is something that Americans, historians, human beings are going to have to grapple with the consequences of forever. You know, it changed the world. And that's why I think I'm really glad that we're having this conversation today, because it's just a reminder, even though we didn't live through it, it is important for all of us to remember, you know, what can happen, and these weapons still exist. And this also was not something that just a bunch of people died in that moment. The effects of radiation, and we saw it later, the effects of napalm, in Vietnam and in Cambodia, and you know, all around the world where we use these chemical weapons as well. We're seeing it in Syria today. They have long-term effects, and it's important that we all know what we're getting ourselves into.
There's a show that was just out, Hiroshima 75 years later. I don't know if it was History Channel or Smithsonian, but it's something that you guys should watch if you want to learn about it. You know, one of the
link.
But the unfortunate behavior of all this was the way we Japanese Americans, which was really, really bad. I mean, for all of you that don't know, my students better know this because I test them on it, but there was an executive order 9066, which we interned the Japanese, and we took about 150,000-ish Japanese Americans. We gave them 2 days to sell their businesses, and we put them in camps because we were worried they were going to be spies. Now, I'm sure a few of them were, but I would bet 99.9% weren't. But it's just what this does. We know all the death and destruction, but also what it does to people that are alive and how we treat them. It's crazy. It's, you know, just as a human being, you know, it's amazing. And these are unfortunate other things that happen out of war that really hurt people. And we did that here in this country. Now, we didn't treat them the same way the Germans or the Japanese treated prisoners. I'll give us that. But we did put them in shitty conditions, and it was not a good thing. And they had to give up all their businesses for people. Anyway,
yeah, and I'm really glad that you brought that up, because it's something that's not often talked about either. And again, generational consequences of getting losing everything, having everything taken away from you, having your civil rights taken away from you. A lot of these people were Americans. They might have been of Japanese descent. They were born in America. They'd never been to Japan, many of them. They didn't speak Japanese. It was one of, I think, the most shameful attacks on civil liberties in our country's history, and it's not what America is about. So, and that's something else that we should remember today when we're seeing civil liberties decline. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. I'm going to jump to some questions now that we kind of did this overview. Someone wants to know if I've ever thought about going into teaching history. What's it like teaching history? Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, well, truthfully, I've only taught I'm in my 5th year. I worked in finance for 25 years, and once my lovely children went out of the house, I decided to drop the suit and go help teenagers and hopefully teach them. I love it. I love interacting with the kids. We have a lot of fun in class, and I'm real straightforward. If they're willing to learn, I don't give a shit what we do. As long as they learn the material, they could say what they want. They want to act like idiots, well, they're teenagers, so that's going to happen. But I'm very okay with that as long as they're learning the material. And I enjoy it. I've learned a ton. I mean, I watch documentaries all the time now, which I never thought I'd say because, you know, I mean, that's what you don't do that when you're younger. Well, you do now, but you know, you're an old soul. But I really enjoy helping kids and teaching them things. And it's great because it helps you relate things now to the past, and there's so many similarities. And like my shirt says,
don't make me repeat myself. History.
So true. There are so many similarities when you learn about history with what's going on today and what's happened in the past. So for me, it's a lot of fun. It's amazing. I enjoy going to work. I get up early, and you know what? I enjoy the students and seeing them learn and come back to me. And you know, I'll see kids in the hall sometimes. They're like, ask me a question, and I love it. I'm like, bring it on.
I love it. I remember going to visit school with you, which is my old high school. And seeing kids just like come up and high five you in the hallway. I mean, they love you, and you're really making a difference. And it's there. You know, you're really lucky if you come across a really amazing teacher that really, you know, makes a difference in your life. So I actually just interviewed a friend of mine who is an elementary school teacher to talk about schools. That's gonna be my next video. But I'm all about teachers and supporting teachers, especially now, and students. You know. But
paid more, all that. There's so many bad things. Teachers work their asses off. Listen, half the teachers are awesome, and there are some that are just in there for the paycheck and the summer's off. But there's some teachers that work their asses off that need to get paid more. I'm just saying, you know, it's a shame.
Amen. Amen. Especially now with that. How has the virtual thing been?
You know, I didn't like it that much because it's very hard to connect with kids when you're on a computer screen. I'm going to go into my classroom and do my lessons out of the classroom remotely, but I can't wait to get back in a class with kids, you know, when this all blows over, because being in a class, you'd have to come to one of my classes in action and see. It's so much fun. I have a big, you know, fun I shoot kids with. We throw a ball around something. It doesn't matter. As long as we're learning, we're active, you know?
I love that. I've been to your class, and it's some of the most fun times I've ever had. Okay, I have one last question for you. What is the best book that you've ever read on World War II?
Oh, wow. Best book on World War
Or
II.
documentary. I know you love documentaries too.
Ugh. I got a book on the Navy. It was kind of boring. Okay. I don't know. I got to think.
Yeah. Well, think about it and then send it to me, because I'll add it to the link in this video. You've been watching a lot of documentaries too, you said.
Yeah, so just so you guys know, History Channel, Smithsonian put on amazing documentaries. I actually watched one recently. It was, I think, 6 parts. It was called Apocalypse, World War II, and it's narrated by Martin Sheen, which, if any of you guys know who that's, Charlie Sheen's dad. And it's funny because...
And also starred in Apocalypse Now.
Right, which is really funny because that movie's crazy, but it's really interesting. You know, I learned a bunch of little stuff I never knew, like just little funky things about like de Gaulle and the Free French versus the Vichy, which we're going to talk about in Europe, and I will not pick on.
We're going to get there.
Oh, the French. But anyways, half the French turned and collaborated with the Germans. It was terrible. And half were fighting with the Allies. It was almost like a civil war going on, but not really. But but yeah, Apocalypse, World War II. I think it's 6 parts or an hour each. Very watchable. The narration's great.
Rachel
Really
says, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning."
It smells like victory. Oh no, yeah, that movie Apocalypse Now, guys.
Yeah. Yeah, and then for Lady Mess, you just asked a question, how do we recommend learning history? I would totally say History Channel and like those recommendations that the professor just sent, and watch my videos.
I started my school with all my notes and stuff at the BWWII website called schoolwires.net. Go under teachers in my name. I have a PowerPoint that goes from 1840s to the present.
No way.
Yeah, it's got vocabulary terms. It's really cool.
That's awesome. I'm gonna link that here for sure.
Send it to you then.
Send it to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. This is so much fun, and it's nice to have an excuse to see you.
I love you. Wait, let me make my parting comment. Any of my students that are on here, I love you still. The ones that didn't come on, you guys suck. I'm just saying, you should be on here having fun, because this stuff is pretty cool. It really is. Anyways, more importantly, love seeing you. I love doing this. So we're going to do the Europe soon, right?
Yeah, we're doing Europe. Europe is next. So we'll chat. We'll find a time. I'll let you guys all know. Thanks for tuning in.
Separate like the Holocaust from Europe. There's just so much. I'm just saying.
There's so much. Yeah, maybe you guys tell me. I'm going to ask everyone, shoot me some comments. What parts you want to focus on in the European theater? Because again, it's a whole lot of shit, and it gets really depressing. And I kind of want to try to keep the mood up a little bit.
Well, we get to make fun of all the crazy Nazis. I mean, they were insane.
They were
fanatics. The hierarchy were the fanatics.
Right. Yeah, they were a piece of fucking work.
Yeah, they were horrible human beings. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that note, I want to thank all you wonderful human beings for tuning in, and we'll speak soon.
All right. Peace.